Have you ever wondered what lies behind a promise made in the shadows of duty? Today, I'm sharing a journey of love, sacrifice, and secrets that unfold in a world of elegance and hidden truths. A story that will touch your heart and linger long after the last word. If you're ready to be swept away, hit that like button and subscribe to join us for every moment of this unforgettable tale. The silk of my wedding gown clung to my skin, heavy and cold, like a promise I couldn't break. I stood in the grand hall of the Sterling Mansion in Boston, a cathedral of wealth where crystal chandeliers glittered like 1,000 captured stars. The air carried the scent of sandalwood and lilies, sharp and elegant, but it did nothing to warm the ache in my chest. I was Emily Harper, 23 years old, a girl from a modest Virginia home, where the smell of my mother's baking once filled the air. Now, I was the bride of James Sterling, CEO of Sterling Enterprises, a man whose sharp jaw and piercing gray eyes seemed carved from steel. This wasn't a wedding born of love. It was a contract, inked in desperation to save my father from the crushing debt of his failed business. The violin's mournful notes echoed through the hall, but all I heard was the rustle of my gown, each step a reminder that I was a prisoner in this gilded cage. My fingers tightened around the silver ring I wore on a chain beneath my dress, my mother's ring, the only piece of her I had left since she passed when I was 10. It wasn't dazzling like the diamond James had slid onto my finger moments ago, but it felt alive, warm, as if her heartbeat lingered in its worn edges. She used to sing lullabies in our tiny kitchen, her voice soft as the flour-dusted apron she wore, her hands brushing my hair. That memory was my anchor now, holding me steady as I faced a future I hadn't chosen. James took my hand to lead me down the aisle, his touch firm, his breath carrying a faint trace of mint that chilled the air between us. "You're my wife, now," he said, his voice low, commanding. Yet for a fleeting moment his eyes softened, gray clouds parting before a storm. I nodded, my throat tight, but inside, fear coiled like smoke. I had never loved, never let anyone close enough to touch my heart. My innocence was a secret I guarded fiercely, locked away like the ring against my chest. To give it up felt like betraying the girl I used to be, the one who dreamed of love under Virginia's wide skies. The ceremony passed in a blur of murmured vows and polite applause. My father sat in the front row, his face gaunt, eyes heavy with guilt. He hadn't wanted this, but the debt had left us no choice. I forced a smile for him, but my heart ached for the days when we'd sit together on our porch, sipping lemonade, before the world turned cruel. As the guests mingled, their champagne flutes clinking like distant bells, I slipped into a small dressing room to catch my breath. My hands trembled as I opened my suitcase, pulling out an old wooden box that held my mother's things. Inside was her letter, written in the final days before she left us. The paper was yellowed, fragile under my fingertips, the ink's faint scent mingling with memories of her perfume. I unfolded it carefully, as if it might crumble like my resolve. Her words flowed in graceful loops. "Emily, you are my light. Hold fast to your honor, even when the world pulls you into shadow." My eyes stung, but I kept reading, drawn to the final line, smudged as if tears had fallen as she wrote, "Ask your father about." The words trailed off, incomplete, a riddle I couldn't solve. My pulse quickened. What had she meant? What secret had she carried to her grave? The letter felt like a weight in my hands, heavy with questions I wasn't ready to face. A sharp knock startled me. I shoved the letter back into the box, my heart racing as the door opened. James stood there, his gray vest tailored to his broad shoulders, his presence filling the room like a storm cloud. His eyes flicked to the box, then back to me, unreadable yet piercing. "It's time," he said, his voice steady, but there was something in his gaze. A curiosity, perhaps, or a challenge. I clutched the box tighter, the wood smooth against my palms, and stood, smoothing my gown. The silk whispered against my skin, a reminder of the role I had to play. As I followed him out, his shadow falling over me, I felt the weight of the letter's mystery pressing against my chest, right beside my mother's ring. This was no fairy tale. I was stepping into a life I didn't understand, bound to a man whose heart was a locked door. Yet as we walked back into the chandelier's light, I couldn't shake the feeling that the smudged words in my mother's letter held a key, not just to her past, but to the path I was about to tread. James glanced at me, his eyes catching mine for a moment longer than necessary, and I wondered if he, too, carried secrets behind that steely facade. The night stretched before us, vast and unknown, and I knew this was only the beginning. The Sterling mansion felt like a labyrinth of stone and silence, its high ceilings swallowing every sound except the soft patter of rain against the tall windows. I sat on the edge of a 4-poster bed in my new room on the 2nd floor, the linen curtains carrying a faint scent of lavender that did little to ease the ache in my chest. It had been 2 days since the wedding, and James's presence was as scarce as warmth in this house. His voice, when I heard it, came through clipped phone calls or brief notes left on the kitchen counter. "Stay out of my office." The words were etched in precise black ink, a barrier as solid as the invisible wall between us. I was Emily Harper, a stranger in my own life, bound to a man who seemed to want nothing from me but my name. The rain's rhythm reminded me of home in Virginia, where I'd sit with my father on our creaky porch, the air thick with the smell of wet grass. Those days were gone, buried under the weight of his debts and my mother's absence. I touched the silver ring hanging on a chain beneath my blouse, its worn surface a tether to her memory. She'd hum Amazing Grace in our kitchen, her hands dusted with flour, her smile a promise that love could mend anything. Now I wasn't so sure. I wanted to believe in love, but fear clung to me like damp cloth. Fear of losing myself in this cold, grand world. Fear of a heart I didn't know how to open. That afternoon, I slipped out to visit my father at the hospital. The cab ride was quiet, Boston's gray streets blurring past like a dream I couldn't wake from. In his room, he lay frail against the white sheets, his once strong hands thin as parchment. "Emily, you don't have to do this," he whispered, his voice cracked with guilt. His eyes, red-rimmed, mirrored the man who'd once spun me in circles under Virginia oaks. I took his hand, feeling the fragile bones beneath his skin, and wiped a bead of sweat from his brow with a tissue. "I want you to live, Dad," I said, my voice steady despite the lump in my throat. The silver ring pressed against my chest, a reminder of the honor I'd promised to uphold. For him. For her. Back at the mansion, the rain had slowed to a drizzle, leaving the air heavy with the scent of wet stone. I stepped into the kitchen, expecting its usual emptiness, but stopped short. On the counter sat a silver tray with a teapot and a small jar of chamomile tea, my father's favorite. My breath caught. "For your father," James said, emerging from the shadows of the dining room. His white shirt was rolled up at the sleeves, revealing forearms taut with quiet strength, and a faint whiff of coffee clung to him, warm and grounding. I stared, my fingers brushing the tray's cool metal. "How did you know he likes chamomile?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. He shrugged, but a ghost of a smile flickered in his gray eyes. "I notice things." My heart stuttered, caught between disbelief and a spark I didn't want to name. A man so cold, so distant, why would he care? That night, I sat by the bedroom window, the moon casting silver threads through the rain-streaked glass. My mother's ring lay in my palm, its weight a comfort against the storm inside me. James was a puzzle I couldn't solve. his actions, clashing with the steel in his voice. I wanted to hate him for trapping me here. But that tray, that tea, it was a crack in the wall he'd built, and I didn't know how to face what lay beyond it. Footsteps broke my thoughts. James stood in the doorway, a glass of whiskey in his hand, the amber liquid catching the moonlight. His eyes, usually sharp as flint, seemed softer, searching. "You're not happy here," he said. Not a question but a fact, his voice low like distant thunder. I turned to face him, my fingers closing over the ring. His presence filled the room, the coffee scent mingling with whiskey, pulling me closer. Despite myself, "I don't know what happiness is anymore," I admitted, my voice trembling. He stepped forward, close enough that I felt the warmth of his breath, mint and whiskey intertwined. His hand lifted, hesitating, then brushed mine, his fingers warm against my cold skin. The touch was fleeting, a heartbeat long, but it left a tremor in my bones. "You'll find it," he said, his gaze holding mine before he turned away, leaving me with the echo of his words and the ghost of his touch. I sank onto the bed, the lavender-scented curtains swaying gently. The chamomile tea, his quiet promise, lingered in my mind like a question. Who was James Sterling? A man of contracts and control, or someone hiding a heart as guarded as my own? The rain fell harder now, a soft roar against the silence, and I knew that wall between us wasn't as solid as it seemed. Somewhere in its cracks, something was growing. Fragile, uncertain, but real. A month had slipped by in the Sterling mansion, and the stone walls no longer felt as cold, though the silence still pressed against me like a heavy quilt. I'd begun to notice James in ways I hadn't expected. His shadow passing the kitchen doorway, the way his gray eyes lingered when he thought I wasn't looking. They weren't just sharp anymore. They carried something unspoken, a weight I couldn't name. That evening I stood at the kitchen counter, the scent of chamomile tea curling through the air. A ritual that tethered me to my father's fragile smile. The porcelain teapot was warm under my fingers, its smoothness a faint echo of my mother's silver ring, still nestled against my chest on its chain. James appeared without warning, his white shirt unbuttoned at the collar, a faint trace of sandalwood clinging to him like a memory. He leaned against the doorway, his presence both steady and unsettling. "Do you know why I married you, Emily?" he asked, his voice low, each word deliberate, like stones dropped into still water. I shook my head, my fingers tightening around the teacup, its heat seeping into my palms. "Your father saved mine from ruin years ago," he said, his gaze fixed on the floor, as if the truth hurt to speak. "He gave up his own dreams to keep my father's business afloat. But I didn't marry you just to repay a debt. I wanted—" He stopped, his eyes meeting mine, raw and unguarded, like a storm breaking open. I froze, the teacup trembling in my hands. My father? A savior? The man who'd lost everything to debt had once been someone's hero? Before I could ask, my phone buzzed sharply on the counter, shattering the moment. The hospital's number flashed on the screen, and my heart plummeted. "It's your father," the nurse said, her voice clipped. "He's taken a turn." James grabbed his keys without a word, his jaw tight, and we raced through Boston's rain-slicked streets, the car's hum drowned by my pounding pulse. In the hospital room, my father lay pale, his breath shallow, his hand cold as I clasped it. "Emily," he rasped, his eyes glassy with regret. "Your mother. She worked herself to death to pay my debts. She didn't want you to know." The words hit like a blow, unraveling everything I thought I understood. My mother, who'd sung lullabies and braided my hair, had carried a secret sacrifice, her life spent to shield us. I remembered her letter, the smudged line, "Ask your father about—" It wasn't just a note. It was a confession, a truth she'd hidden to protect me. Tears burned my eyes, the silver ring heavy against my skin, a silent witness to her love. James stood behind me, a quiet pillar in the sterile room. As my father drifted into sleep, I felt James's hand rest lightly on my shoulder, his touch warm through the thin cotton of my sweater, steady as an anchor. "I'm here," he whispered, his voice barely audible over the beep of monitors. I turned, and his eyes held mine. Not cold, not distant, but deep with a sorrow that mirrored my own. In that moment, he wasn't the CEO who'd bound me with a contract. He was a man who saw my pain and chose to stay. Back at the mansion, I sat alone in my room. The rain now a soft murmur outside. I pulled my mother's letter from its wooden box, my fingers tracing the smudged ink, the paper's edges soft from years of waiting. "Ask your father about his mistakes, her sacrifice, a love that broke her." I pressed the letter to my chest, tears falling, and looked up to find James in the doorway, his silhouette softened by the lamplight. His gaze held no judgment, only a quiet promise, as if he knew the weight of secrets too. For the first time, I felt he might be more than my husband in name, a man whose heart was opening, just as mine was beginning to crack. The Sterling Mansion's kitchen glowed under the soft light of a single lamp, the scent of chamomile tea lingering like a quiet promise. I stood at the counter, my hands wrapped around a warm mug, the steam curling upward as I tried to piece together the truth about my mother's sacrifice. It had been a week since my father's confession in the hospital, and though he was growing stronger, the weight of her secret clung to me like damp wool. My fingers brushed the silver ring on its chain, its familiar warmth a reminder of her love, and the duty I carried to honor it. I was Emily Harper, 23, still navigating this gilded cage. But something had shifted. James was no longer just a shadow in the hall. He was becoming a presence I couldn't ignore. That morning, I'd convinced my father to visit the mansion, his first outing since his health had faltered. He sat in the living room now, his laughter faint, but real as James, of all people, recounted a story about a baseball game from years ago. My father's passion. I paused in the doorway, watching James's broad shoulders relax, his gray eyes crinkling at the corners, a rare smile softening his sharp features. The air held a trace of his sandalwood cologne, grounding and warm. "Thank you," I said later, as we walked back from dropping my father at the hospital. James glanced at me, his hands in his pockets, the autumn breeze tugging at his coat. "I didn't do it for you," he said, but the way his gaze lingered told me otherwise. My heart stirred, a fragile thing waking in the dark. Trouble came that evening at a family dinner, the dining room aglow with candlelight and the clink of crystal glasses. Clara, James's older sister, sat across from me, her sharp eyes cutting through the polite chatter. I'd heard her voice weeks ago, cold and accusing over the phone, labeling me a gold digger. Now, she leaned forward, her voice low but venomous. "You don't belong here, Emily. You're not one of us." The words stung, my fingers tightening around the napkin, the linen rough against my skin. I wanted to shrink, to disappear, but then James's hand found mine under the table, his fingers warm and steady, a silent vow. "That's enough, Clara," he said, his tone calm but unyielding, like steel wrapped in velvet. My breath caught, my eyes meeting his. He was defending me, choosing me, and in that moment, I felt seen. Later, alone in the library, I stumbled across a folder left on a side table, its edges worn. Curiosity pulled me closer, my fingers brushing the paper, still faintly warm from someone's touch. Inside was a financial record. James had paid off my father's debts months before our engagement, long before any contract was signed. My pulse quickened, the room's leather and ink scent fading as the truth sank in. He hadn't needed to marry me. "Why didn't you tell me?" I asked when he entered, a coffee mug in his hand, the steam rising like a question. His eyes, usually so guarded, softened, reflecting the firelight. "I wanted you to stay because you chose to, not because you felt indebted." His voice was quiet, raw, a confession that cracked something open inside me. I stepped closer, the mug's warmth radiating between us, my voice barely a whisper. "I'm trying, James." He set the mug down, his hand hovering near mine, as if afraid to break the fragile thing we were building. "I know," he said, a smile flickering, tender and unguarded. The library's silence wrapped around us, broken only by the distant tick of a clock. I saw my mother's ring in my mind, her lesson of honor not just in sacrifice, but in trust. James had given me that silently, and I wondered if I could give it back. The Sterling Mansion's kitchen was bathed in the golden glow of late afternoon, the air rich with the scent of brewed coffee, its warmth curling through the room like a soft sigh. I stood at the counter, my hands cradling a chipped ceramic mug, its roughness a quiet comfort against my fingertips. 2 months had passed since I'd learned of my mother's sacrifice, her life spent to shield my father from his debts. And the truth had settled into me like a stone, heavy but grounding. My father was home now, his strength returning, and the silver ring on its chain against my chest felt lighter, as if my mother's love had finally found peace. I was Emily Harper, 23, no longer just a bride bound by a contract, but a woman, learning to weave trust into the fragile threads of this new life. James had become a steady presence, not in grand gestures but in quiet ones, his silhouette in the doorway, his gray eyes softening when they met mine. Yesterday, I'd caught him in the living room with my father, their voices low over a shared newspaper, laughter breaking through like sunlight. It stirred something in me, a warmth I hadn't felt since childhood, when my mother's lullabies filled our Virginia home. I wanted to thank him, but words felt too small for the shift he'd brought to my heart. That morning, I'd invited my father to stay for the weekend, his first real visit to the mansion. He sat now in the garden, his frail frame wrapped in a wool blanket, the autumn leaves drifting around him like scattered memories. I brought him a tray of chamomile tea, the steam carrying its familiar floral note, and his smile, though weak, was brighter than I'd seen in months. "You've done so much, Emily," he said, his hand trembling as it touched mine, his skin, papery but warm. I knelt beside him, brushing a leaf from his blanket, and felt my mother's ring press against my chest, a reminder of her honor, now mine to carry forward. As I returned to the kitchen, James appeared, his white shirt rolled up at the sleeves, a small wooden box in his hands. "This was your mother's," he said, his voice low, almost reverent. My breath caught as he opened it, revealing a delicate, silver necklace, its pendant a tiny star that glinted in the fading light. "I found it in my father's old safe," he explained, his eyes searching mine. "He must have kept it after your father gave it to him. For safekeeping, maybe." The necklace shimmered, a piece of my mother I'd thought lost forever, and tears welled as I took it, my fingers tracing its cool metal, smooth as her voice in memory. Without thinking, I stepped forward and hugged him, my cheek against his chest, his heartbeat steady through the cotton. "Thank you," I whispered, and his arms tightened around me, warm and sure, a home I hadn't known I needed. Later, at dinner, Clara joined us, her presence a surprise after weeks of distance. The dining room's candles flickered, casting shadows on the mahogany table, the air laced with the scent of rosemary from the meal. She'd hurt me before, her words sharp as thorns, but tonight, her eyes were softer, hesitant. "I was wrong. About you, Emily," she said, her voice low, the clink of her fork pausing. I didn't know about James. She glanced at him, then back to me. He turned down a major deal last year, one that could have doubled his company's reach. He did it to protect your father's name, to keep his past mistakes out of the public eye. My fork slipped, clattering against the plate. James's hand stilled beside his glass, his jaw tight, but he didn't deny it. I stared at him, my heart a tangled knot of awe and ache. Why? I asked, my voice barely audible. He looked at me then, his gray eyes deep as dusk, reflecting the candlelight. Because you needed me, he said simply. And I found I needed you to stay alive. The words hung between us, soft but seismic, and my chest tightened with a truth I'd been afraid to name. I was falling for him, not as a savior or a contract, but as a man who saw me whole. I reached for his hand across the table, my fingers brushing his, the warmth of his skin a quiet vow. I'm here now, I said, echoing his words from the hospital, and his answering smile was a beacon in the dark. As dusk settled outside, painting the sky in hues of amber and rose, we moved to the garden, the three of us, my father, James, and me. The air was crisp, scented with earth and fading leaves, and we sat in silence, the weight of forgiveness settling around us like a shawl. My father took my hand, his grip stronger now, and James's arm brushed mine, a steady warmth. I thought of my mother, her necklace now safe in its box, her ring still close to my heart. She'd have been proud, I knew, not just of my duty, but of the love I'd found. A love built on trust, not obligation. In the quiet, I imagined a future here, in this mansion no longer cold, where mornings would smell of coffee and evenings would hum with shared stories. James caught my eye, his gaze a promise of tomorrows we'd face together, and I smiled, knowing we'd already begun. The Sterling Mansion's library was a sanctuary of quiet, its shelves heavy with leather-bound books, the air laced with the scent of aged paper and polished wood. I sat at a mahogany desk, the late morning light filtering through tall windows, casting golden patterns on the floor. My mother's silver ring rested in my palm, its worn surface catching the sun, a silent tether to her memory. 3 months had passed since I'd stood under the chandelier's glow, a reluctant bride bound by a contract to save my father. Now, I was Emily Harper, 23, no longer a prisoner in this opulent world, but a woman finding her place within it, my heart opening to James in ways I hadn't dared imagine. Yesterday, my father had stayed for dinner, his laughter filling the dining room as he shared stories of his youth, tales I'd never heard, of dances under Virginia stars and dreams he'd set aside. His strength was returning, his eyes brighter, but his words about my mother lingered like a half-remembered song. She worked herself to the bone for me, Emily, he'd said, his voice breaking. Her heart gave out because I failed her. The truth had settled into me, not as a wound, but as a call to honor her sacrifice differently, through love, not just duty. I wanted to tell her I'd learned that lesson, that I was trying to live it. I pulled a sheet of paper from the desk, the crisp edges smooth under my fingers, and began to write. Dear Mama, I started, the ink's faint metallic scent grounding me. I found your necklace, and I know now what you gave up for us. I'm not angry anymore. I'm grateful, and I'm trying to make you proud. The words flowed, each one a release, as if I were speaking to her across the years. I wrote of my father's healing, of James's quiet kindness, of the love I was learning to trust. My mother's ring lay beside the paper, its silver gleaming like her smile in my memories, when she'd hum lullabies in our flower-dusted kitchen. James found me there, his footsteps soft on the rug, his presence carrying a familiar trace of sandalwood and coffee. He paused at the desk, his white shirt slightly rumpled, his gray eyes catching the light as they met mine. "Writing something important?" he asked, his voice low, curious rather than intrusive. I hesitated, then slid the letter toward him, my heart thudding. He read silently, his fingers brushing the paper, and when he looked up, his gaze was soft, unguarded, like a sky after rain. "You're her light, Emily," he said, echoing my mother's words from her letter, the one with the smudged ink that had unraveled so much. I stood, my chair creaking faintly, and moved closer, the library's warmth wrapping around us. "I'm starting to believe that," I said, my voice steady. He reached for my hand, his fingers intertwining with mine, warm and sure, and pulled me into an embrace. It wasn't hurried or desperate, but deep, like roots finding soil. My cheek rested against his chest, his heartbeat a rhythm I could follow. And for the first time I felt no fear, only certainty. "You've given me something I didn't know I needed," he murmured into my hair, his breath warm against my scalp. "A reason to be more than what I was." We stood there, the library's silence broken only by the distant chirp of birds. Outside, the world beyond the windows fading. I thought of my mother's sacrifice, my father's redemption, and the man who'd chosen me not out of duty but desire. The letter lay unfinished on the desk, but I knew I'd end it with hope. For a family rebuilt for a love that would endure. James's arms tightened, a promise we didn't need to speak, and I knew we were writing our own story now, one line at a time. The Sterling Mansion's garden was a tapestry of autumn, its maples ablaze with crimson and gold, their leaves drifting like embers in the late October breeze. I stood on the stone path, my wool scarf soft against my neck, the air sharp with the scent of damp earth and pine. 4 months had passed since I'd walked down the aisle under a chandelier's cold glow, a 23-year-old stranger bound to James Sterling by a contract to save my father. Now, I was Emily Harper, no longer adrift in this opulent world, but anchored by a love I was learning to trust. My mother's silver ring hung on its chain beneath my sweater, its weight a quiet reminder of her lessons: honor, sacrifice, and the courage to choose hope. James had become my compass, his presence steady yet unguarded in ways I hadn't expected. Last night I'd found him in the library, his broad shoulders hunched over a photo album, his gray eyes distant. He hadn't spoken, but his silence invited me closer, and we'd sat together, the pages whispering of a past I didn't yet know. That moment lingered as I walked the garden now, my boots crunching on gravel, my thoughts tangled with questions about the man who'd chosen me, not just as a wife, but as a partner in something deeper. Clara, James's sister, joined me unexpectedly, her coat buttoned against the chill, her auburn hair catching the sunlight. Since her apology weeks ago, she'd softened, her sharp edges dulled by time. "You've changed him, Emily," she said, her voice low, the crunch of leaves under her steps a soft counterpoint. I glanced at her, my fingers brushing the ring's chain, its metal cool through my sweater. "What do you mean?" I asked, my breath visible in the crisp air. She paused, her gaze fixed on the horizon where the sun dipped low, painting the sky in hues of amber and lavender. "James carries a wound," she said, her words careful, like stones placed on a fragile bridge. "Our father, he betrayed our mother, years ago. An affair, debts, lies. It broke her. James was young, but he saw it all. He forgave father to keep the family together, but it cost him. He built walls, Emily, ones I thought no one could breach." Her eyes met mine, warm but searching. "Until you." My heart stuttered, the garden's colors blurring as her words sank in. James, The man who'd paid my father's debts, who'd defended me against her scorn, had carried his own shadows, just as I carried mine. I found him later in the study, the room aglow with the fire's soft crackle, its heat mingling with the scent of leather and whiskey. He stood by the window, his white shirt open at the collar, a glass in his hand, the amber liquid catching, the flames. "Clara told me," I said, my voice steady despite the tremor in my chest. He turned, his gray eyes narrowing, then softening, like clouds parting. "She talks too much," he said, but there was no bite in his tone, only a weary resignation. I stepped closer, the floorboards creaking under my boots, the fire's warmth a quiet pulse against my skin. "She said you forgave your father," I continued, my fingers tracing the ring's chain, its familiar curve grounding me. "That it cost you." He set the glass down, the clink sharp in the silence, and faced me fully, his jaw tight, but his gaze open, raw. "It did," he admitted, his voice low, rough. "I thought forgiveness meant strength, but it left me hollow. I built Sterling Enterprises to prove I wasn't him, that I could control my world. Then I met you, Emily, and control didn't matter anymore." His words hit like a tide, washing over the fears I'd held since our wedding day. I crossed the room, my scarf slipping to the floor, its wool soft against the wood. "We both have shadows," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "My mother's death, my father's mistakes, they shaped me, but I don't want to live in them anymore. I want to step through, with you." His eyes held mine, deep as dusk, and he reached for me, his hand cupping my face, his thumb brushing my cheek, warm and deliberate. "I've been alone a long time," he said, his breath mint-scented, close enough to stir my hair. "But not anymore." He kissed my forehead, a gesture so tender it unraveled me, his lips soft against my skin, a vow without words. I leaned into him, my hands resting on his chest, feeling the steady rhythm of his heart through his shirt. The fire's glow danced around us, its crackle a quiet hymn, and I thought of my mother's letter, her call to honor. It wasn't just about sacrifice, I realized. It was about choosing love, even when it scared you. James's arms encircled me, his warmth a shield against the past, and I knew we were both stepping forward, shadows trailing but no longer binding. We stayed there, the study's silence broken only by the fire's soft pops and the distant hum of wind outside. My mother's ring pressed against my chest, a beacon of her legacy, and I felt her pride, not just in me, but in the man who'd become my home. Tomorrow I'd write to her again, telling her of this moment, of a love that wasn't loud but lasting. For now, I held James, our breaths sinking, and trusted that the light ahead was ours to claim. The Sterling Mansion's kitchen hummed with warmth, the scent of freshly brewed coffee weaving through the air like a soft melody. Sunlight streamed through the lace curtains, casting delicate patterns on the oak table where I sat, my fingers tracing the rim of a ceramic mug, its glaze smooth and cool. A year had passed since I'd stood beneath a chandelier's icy glow, a 23-year-old bride bound to James Sterling by a contract to save my father from ruin. Now, I was Emily Harper, 24, no longer a stranger in this opulent world, but a woman who'd found home, not in marble halls but in the quiet spaces between us. My mother's silver ring hung on its chain against my chest, its weight a gentle reminder of her legacy. Honor wasn't just sacrifice, but love chosen every day. This morning my father joined us, his steps steadier now, his laughter filling the room as he stirred sugar into his coffee, the spoon clinking softly. His recovery had been slow, but each smile felt like a victory, a thread mending the fabric of our family. I watched him, my heart full, remembering the hospital nights when I'd feared losing him. Those fears seemed distant now, softened by time and the man beside me. James leaned against the counter, his white shirt rolled up at the sleeves, a faint trace of sandalwood cologne lingering as he poured cream into his mug. His gray eyes caught mine, crinkling with a smile that had once been rare, now as familiar as the dawn. We'd come far, James and I. The contract that bound us had faded like ink in sunlight, replaced by something stronger, trust forged in shared silences, in hands held through storms. I thought of the library where I'd written to my mother, the study where he'd kissed my forehead, each moment a step toward this kitchen, this morning, this life. My father's voice broke my reverie, recounting a story of my mother baking, pies for neighbors, her apron dusted with flour, her laugh bright as summer. "She'd love this, Emily," he said, his eyes glistening. "You here, happy." I reached for his hand, his skin warm and weathered, and squeezed gently, the silver ring pressing against my chest, a silent agreement. James set his mug down, the clink soft against the counter, and crossed to me, his hand resting on my shoulder, a steady warmth through my sweater. "She would," he said, his voice low, resonant, as if he'd known her too. I tilted my head to meet his gaze, his eyes deep as dusk, reflecting the sunlight in flecks of silver. In them, I saw not just the man who'd paid my father's debts or defended me against Clara's scorn, but the one who'd shared his own shadows, his father's betrayal, his walls of control, and chosen to step beyond them with me. That choice, I knew, was our true vow. Clara had visited last week, her presence no longer sharp but softened, like a blade sheathed. She'd brought a photo of their mother, her smile echoing James's, and we'd placed it on the mantel, a quiet bridge between our families. "You've made this house a home again," she'd said, her words lingering as I looked around now. The kitchen, once cold, was alive with us. Coffee's aroma, my father's stories, James's touch. I thought of my mother's necklace, safe in its box, and her letter, its smudged ink a map to this moment. She'd taught me honor, but James had shown me it could bloom in love, not just duty. As noon approached, we moved to the garden, the air crisp with autumn's bite, scented with pine and fading roses. My father settled into a wicker chair, a blanket draped over his knees, while James and I walked the stone path, our shoulders brushing, his hand finding mine. The leaves crunched beneath our boots, a rhythm syncing with our steps. And I felt the ring's gentle weight, my mother's presence woven into the breeze. "What are you thinking?" James asked, his voice a soft rumble, his fingers tightening around mine, warm despite the chill. "That this is enough," I said, pausing to face him, the garden's colors framing his sharp features, high cheekbones, jaw carved like stone, eyes soft as twilight. "You, Dad, this life, it's more than I dreamed under that chandelier." He smiled, a slow, unguarded curve, and drew me close, his arms a haven, his breath mint-scented against my hair. "You're my light, Emily," he murmured, echoing my mother's words, and I pressed my cheek to his chest, his heartbeat a promise that time couldn't break. We rejoined my father, the three of us sitting in companionable silence, the sun climbing higher, its warmth a benediction. I imagined years ahead, mornings like this, coffee shared, stories told, love growing like the maples around us. My mother's ring, her necklace, her lessons. They'd carry us forward, not as burdens, but as stars guiding our way. James's hand rested on mine, his wedding band glinting, and I knew we'd built something eternal, a light no shadow could dim. If this story has touched your heart, Please share your own tale of love in the comments and subscribe for more journeys of the soul.